The winter wind cut through Owen Northfield's threadbare coat as he stacked firewood against the side of his cabin, and when he turned to reach for another log, he found her standing at the edge of the clearing, watching him with eyes the color of amber in firelight. She had appeared without a sound, as she always did, though the snow crunched loudly beneath his own boots. Her green skin looked almost gray in the fading afternoon light, and the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw gleamed white against her lips. She wore leather armor despite the cold, practical and worn, and her black hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder. Owen had grown used to her silent visits over the past months, had learned to feel her presence before he saw her, but he still could not quite read the expression on her strong, featured face. "Hello," he said, setting down the log. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air. "Cold day for watching a man do chores." She did not answer. She never did. The orc woman simply stood there, her gaze steady and unreadable, and after a moment Owen returned to his work. He had stopped trying to make conversation after the first few weeks. Whatever brought her to his homestead, whatever kept her coming back through the autumn and into this brutal winter, she clearly had no intention of sharing it. He told himself it did not matter. Told himself he should probably be more concerned about an orc warrior appearing on his property every few days, that the other settlers in the valley would call him a fool for not driving her off. But there was something in her eyes that made him certain she meant no harm, and besides, Owen had always been better at trusting his instincts than following common sense. He had moved to the frontier 2 years ago, fleeing memories of a war that had taken his brother and left Owen with nothing but nightmares and a small inheritance. The land had been cheap because it sat in a buffer zone between human settlements and orc territories, and most people considered it too dangerous for farming. But Owen had worked hard, cleared the trees, built his cabin log by log, and planted crops in soil that turned out to be surprisingly rich. His nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, an old trapper named Silas who checked on him once a month and always shook his head at Owen's choice of location. The orc woman had first appeared in late spring. Owen had been planting potatoes when he felt eyes on him and looked up to find her watching from the tree line. His heart had hammered in his chest, his hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. But she made no move toward him, and after several long minutes, she simply melted back into the forest. She returned the next week and the week after that, until her visits became almost routine. She never came closer than 20 paces, never spoke, never threatened. Just watched with those amber eyes, as if trying to solve some puzzle she could not quite work out. Owen finished stacking the wood as the sun touched the horizon, painting the snow-covered clearing in shades of orange and pink. When he looked toward the tree line again, she was gone. He sighed and brushed snow from his gloves, then headed inside to start a fire. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace he had mortared himself, and a loft where he slept on nights when the cold grew too fierce. He had few possessions. The furniture he had built from lumber, his father's old rifle hanging above the fireplace, a shelf of books he had brought from his old life. It was a solitary existence, but after the chaos of war, Owen found he preferred the silence. He was frying salt pork for dinner when he heard the sound. At first he thought it was wind or perhaps a wolf howling in the distance. Then it came again, clearer this time, and Owen recognized it as a human scream. He grabbed his rifle and coat and ran outside, following the sound north toward the road that connected the scattered homesteads. The screaming grew louder, accompanied now by rough laughter and the sound of breaking wood. Owen burst through a stand of pines and found a scene that made his blood run cold. A covered wagon had been overturned on the narrow road, its contents spilled across the snow. 3 men on horseback surrounded a family. A man lying motionless in a spreading pool of blood, a woman on her knees clutching a small child, and a girl of perhaps 12 or 13 backed against the wagon with terror in her eyes. The mounted men wore mismatched armor and the hard faces of bandits who had made the lawless frontier their hunting ground. "Please," the woman was sobbing. "Please, we have nothing of value, just let us go." One of the bandits dismounted, a tall man with a scarred face and a cruel smile. "Nothing of value, I see plenty of value right here." He reached for the girl and she screamed. Owen raised his rifle. "Leave them alone." The bandits turned and the scarred man laughed. "Well now, another homesteader playing hero, you alone, boy." Owen's hands were steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I am. But this rifle carries 6 shots and I only see 3 of you. Better odds than I had in the war." The scarred man studied him, weighing his chances. Owen could see the calculation in his eyes. Was one farmer worth the risk of losing men? The bandit's hand moved toward his pistol, and Owen knew he was about to find out if he could actually shoot a man again after swearing he never would. Then the orc woman stepped out of the trees behind the bandits, moving with a silence that should have been impossible for someone her size. She was not particularly tall, perhaps 5.5 feet, with a lean, athletic build that spoke of speed rather than brute strength. But the twin axes in her hands caught the fading light, and her amber eyes had gone hard as stone. The bandits' horses smelled her first and began to dance nervously. When the men turned and saw what had spooked their mounts, the scarred leader went pale. "Shit, orc." The orc woman said nothing. She simply stood there, axes ready, and Owen saw a muscle twitch in her jaw. The bandits looked between her and Owen, trapped between 2 threats, and evidently decided that discretion was the better part of survival. They wheeled their horses and galloped away down the road, leaving their would-be victims behind. Owen lowered his rifle and hurried to the family. The woman was still clutching her child, rocking back and forth, and the girl had collapsed against the wagon, sobbing. Owen knelt beside the man and pressed his fingers to the man's throat, but he already knew what he would find. The bandit's sword had opened his chest, and the snow beneath him was dark with blood. "I am sorry," Owen said quietly to the woman. "He is gone." The woman's sobs grew louder, and Owen felt a familiar helplessness wash over him. He had seen too much death during the war, had held too many dying men, and the sight of this murdered farmer brought it all flooding back. He forced himself to focus on the living. "Can you stand? We need to get you somewhere safe before those men come back." The woman nodded weakly, and Owen helped her to her feet. The child she held was a boy of perhaps 3 years, his face buried in his mother's shoulder. The older girl had stopped crying and was staring at the orc woman with wide, frightened eyes. Owen turned and found the orc woman still standing guard, her axes lowered now but ready. Her gaze was fixed on the road where the bandits had disappeared. "Thank you," Owen said. "You saved their lives." For the first time in the months he had known her, the orc woman met his eyes directly. There was something raw in her expression, something that might have been pain or memory or both. Then she looked away, and the moment passed. She sheathed her axes with smooth, practiced movements and turned to leave. "Wait," Owen called. "Please, at least tell me your name." The orc woman paused. For a long moment, Owen thought she would simply walk away as she always did. Then, without turning around, she spoke for the first time. Her voice was lower than he had expected, rough with disuse, and her accent carried the guttural consonants of the orcish language beneath the human words. "Lyra, Lyra," Owen repeated. "I am Owen, Owen Northfield." She nodded once. a slight dip of her head, and then she was gone, melting into the darkening forest with the same eerie silence she always employed. Owen stared after her for a moment, then turned back to the grieving family. There was work to be done, the grim work of the dead, and it would not wait. He helped the woman and her children to his cabin, then returned with his horse to retrieve the body. By the time he finished burying the farmer in the frozen ground behind his property, full dark had fallen and Owen's hands were bloody despite his gloves. He found the family huddled by his fireplace, the mother still holding her son while the daughter tried to stop shaking. Over the next few days, Owen learned their story. The woman's name was Martha. Her children were called Peter and Sarah. They had been traveling from a failed homestead in the Eastern Territories, hoping to reach a settlement called Ashford where Martha's sister lived. Her husband Thomas had been a carpenter, a gentle man who had never learned to use the sword he carried. The bandits had appeared without warning, and Thomas had died trying to protect his family. Owen sent word to Silas, who brought supplies and helped arrange for Martha and the children to continue their journey with a group of traders heading west. Before they left, Martha took Owen's hands in hers and thanked him with tears in her eyes. "You are a good man," she said. "I hope you find happiness in this hard land." Owen watched them go and felt the familiar emptiness settle over him again. The cabin seemed larger and quieter without their presence, and he found himself listening for sounds that did not come. He threw himself into work, preparing for the deep winter he knew was approaching. He reinforced his barn, checked and rechecked his stores, and cut enough firewood to last until spring. Lyra did not return. Days passed, then a week, then two. Owen told himself it did not matter, that her absence should mean nothing to him. She had been a silent observer, nothing more, and whatever strange compulsion had brought her to his homestead had apparently run its course. But he found himself scanning the tree line when he worked outside, found himself listening for the soft sound of her footsteps in the snow. The clearing felt emptier without her watchful presence. The first major storm of winter arrived in the third week of December, a howling blizzard that piled snow against Owen's door and made it impossible to see more than a few feet. He stayed inside for 3 days, feeding his fire and reading by lamplight, while the wind screamed around the cabin's walls. When the storm finally broke and he could dig himself out, he found the world transformed. Snow lay in drifts taller than a man, and the trees bent under the weight of ice. Owen spent the morning clearing a path to his barn and checking on his livestock. He had 4 chickens, a pig, and an old mare named Daisy who looked at him reproachfully, as if the storm had been his fault. He fed them and made sure they had water, then returned to the cabin to find Lyra standing in his clearing. She was covered in snow, her leather armor crusted with ice, and she swayed slightly as she stood there. Owen realized with a shock that she was injured. Dark blood stained the snow at her feet, and she held her left arm pressed tight against her side. As he watched, her legs buckled and she collapsed to her knees. Owen ran to her without thinking, closing the distance between them in seconds. This close, he could see the gash in her side where something had torn through her armor. The wound was deep and still bleeding, and Lyra's green skin had taken on a grayish pallor. Her amber eyes were unfocused, struggling to track his movements. "What happened?" Owen asked, then shook his head. "Never mind. Can you stand? I need to get you inside." Lyra tried to rise and failed. Owen slipped his arm around her waist, careful of her injury, and hauled her to her feet. She was heavier than he expected, solid muscle despite her relatively compact frame, but adrenaline gave him strength. He half dragged, half carried her to the cabin and managed to get her through the door and onto his bed. In the better light, the injury looked even worse. The gash ran from just below her ribs to her hip, a deep slice that had clearly been made by a blade. Owen had seen similar wounds during the war, had learned field medicine from necessity, and he knew she would die if the bleeding was not stopped. He built up the fire, heated water, and gathered the supplies he would need. Clean cloth for bandages, needle and thread, the bottle of whiskey he kept for emergencies. Lyra watched him through half-closed eyes as he worked, her breathing shallow and rapid. When Owen began cutting away the damaged armor, she tried to speak, but he shushed her. "Save your strength. This is going to hurt, and I need you to stay still." He cleaned the wound as gently as he could, though he heard her sharp intake of breath as the whiskey bit into torn flesh. The gash was clean-edged, which was good, but it had penetrated deep. Owen threaded his needle with hands that only shook a little and began to stitch. He had done this before, on men who screamed and cursed, and Lyra bore the pain better than most. She made no sound except for the occasional harsh breath, her jaw clenched tight around her tusks. When he finished, Owen bandaged her ribs and stepped back to survey his work. It was not pretty, but the bleeding had stopped and the wound was closed. Lyra's eyes had drifted shut, and for a moment Owen feared he had lost her. Then her chest rose and fell, and he relaxed slightly. She was unconscious but alive. Owen cleaned up the bloody water and ruined bandages, then sat down in his chair by the fire. His hands were shaking now that the crisis had passed, and he poured himself a measure of whiskey to steady his nerves. Outside, the day was moving toward evening, and the temperature was already dropping. He added more wood to the fire and tried to think. An orc woman was sleeping in his bed, gravely injured and vulnerable. If anyone from the nearby settlements found out, there would be trouble. Orcs and humans had been at war for generations, and even though an uneasy peace had held for the past 5 years, old hatreds died hard. Owen had seen what humans did to captured orcs during the war, had heard the stories that soldiers told around campfires. He had never participated, had always found excuses to be elsewhere, but he had not stopped it either. That guilt was one of many he carried, but Lyra had saved that family. She had stood up to armed bandits without hesitation, had risked her life to protect strangers who would probably have run from her in terror under different circumstances. And before that, she had spent months watching over his homestead, silent and vigilant. Whatever her reasons, Owen owed her a debt. He would protect her, keep her safe until she healed. And maybe, if she was willing, he would finally learn why she had been watching him all these months. Lyra woke near midnight, her eyes snapping open with sudden clarity. Owen had dozed off in his chair, but he came alert at her movement and moved to her side. "Easy," he said. "You are safe. You are in my cabin." Lyra's gaze darted around the room, taking in her surroundings. When she tried to sit up, pain contorted her features and she gasped. Owen gently pressed her back down. "You have a bad wound. You need to rest." "How long?" Her voice was even rougher than before, scraped raw by pain. "I stitched you up this afternoon. You have been unconscious for about 8 hours." Owen poured water from a pitcher and held the cup to her lips. "Drink. You need fluids." Lyra drank deeply, some of the gray leaving her complexion. When she finished, she met Owen's eyes. "Thank you. You saved that family," Owen said. "And you have been watching over my land for months. I figure I owe you." He paused, then added carefully, "What happened to you?" Lyra was silent for a long moment. Then slowly she began to speak. "Bandits, same ones from before. They came to my camp last night, wanted revenge for the humiliation." Her lips pulled back from her tusks in something that was not quite a smile. "They got less than they bargained for. How many were there? 5. 3 did not leave." Owen absorbed this. "And the other 2 ran, but not before one got lucky." Lyra touched her bandaged side gingerly. I tried to make it back to my camp, but the storm came. Your homestead was closer. I am glad you came here, Owen said, and was surprised to realize he meant it. You need rest and time to heal. You can stay as long as necessary. Lyra studied his face with those disconcerting amber eyes. Why would you do this? I am an orc. Your people hate mine. You are not my people. You are not anything to do with what happened in the war. Owen stood and added wood to the fire. Besides, not all humans hate orcs. Some of us are just trying to live our lives and let others do the same. That makes you rare, Lyra said quietly. Owen shrugged. Maybe. But I have seen what hate does. I fought in the war, killed men because I was told they were my enemies. I am done with that. Out here on the frontier, we can be something different. We can choose differently. Lyra closed her eyes, exhaustion clearly pulling at her. Before she slipped back into sleep, she murmured something Owen almost did not catch. That is why I watched you. He wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to know the full story behind her silent vigils, but she was already unconscious again. Owen covered her with an extra blanket and returned to his chair. Sleep did not come easily, and he found himself watching the rise and fall of her breathing, making sure it stayed steady and strong. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Owen slept in his chair by the fire and gave Lyra his bed. He changed her bandages twice a day, checking for signs of infection, and was relieved when the wound began to heal cleanly. Orcs apparently recovered faster than humans. Within 3 days, Lyra was able to sit up without gasping, and after a week she could walk slowly around the cabin, though the movement clearly pained her. She was not an easy patient. She chafed at her weakness and grew irritable when Owen insisted she rest. But she also began to talk, slowly at first and then with growing ease, as if months of silence were finally breaking like a dam. Owen learned that she was 22 years old, that she had been a scout for an orc warband before the peace treaty disbanded the military units. She had family in the mountain territories to the north, but she had left them 2 years ago, seeking something she could not quite name. I was tired of fighting, she said one evening as they shared a simple dinner of stew and bread. Tired of being told humans were monsters. I had killed so many, and I did not even know what I was fighting for anymore. Owen nodded. I felt the same way. The generals talked about honor and duty, but on the ground it was just blood and mud. I shot men I never met, who had never done anything to me, and I was supposed to feel good about it. Did you? No, I felt sick. Every time. Owen poked at his stew. After my brother died, I left. Took my inheritance and came out here to get away from all of it. Lyra was quiet for a while. Your brother. How did he die? Orc Blade, Owen said, and saw her flinch. But that does not mean I blame all orcs any more than you should blame all humans for what we did to your people. The war made killers of all of us. We were both victims of people who cared more about power than about the lives they destroyed. You are a strange man, Owen Northfield, Lyra said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than mocking. I have been told that before. Owen managed a small smile. Though usually not by someone whose life I just saved. Is that what you did? Save my life? You would have bled out if you had not reached me, so yes, I suppose I did. Lyra looked down at her half-empty bowl. Then I owe you a debt. That is important to my people. A life debt must be repaid. You do not owe me anything, Owen said firmly. You saved that family. You probably saved me too, because I am not sure I would have been fast enough to shoot all 3 of those bandits before one of them shot me. We are even. It does not work that way. Then we will just have to disagree. Owen collected their bowls and carried them to the wash basin. Besides, I like having someone to talk to. It gets lonely out here. Behind him, Lyra made a soft sound that might have been a laugh. I noticed. You talk to your horse. Daisy is an excellent conversationalist, Owen said, mock-offended. She never interrupts, always agrees with me, and only occasionally tries to bite. This time Lyra definitely laughed, a low, rough sound that Owen found he liked very much. He turned to find her smiling, really smiling, and the expression transformed her face. She had a good smile, he thought. He wanted to see it more often. As Lyra healed, she began to help around the homestead. At first it was small things, mending torn clothes, preparing vegetables for cooking, feeding the fire. Owen protested that she should rest, but she waved him off. "I am going mad just sitting here," she said. "Let me be useful." Soon she was doing more. She had a surprising knack for woodworking and helped Owen repair a fence that had been damaged in the storm. She showed him how to set snares the orc way, which was more efficient than his own crude traps. In the evenings, they played cards with a worn deck Owen had brought from his old life, and Lyra proved to be both a quick learner and a terrible bluffer. "You tug your braid when you have a good hand," Owen said one night, laying down 3 queens to her pair of 9s. Lyra scowled and threw her cards down. "That is not fair. You should not be watching for tells. All of card playing is watching for tells. Besides, you hum when I have a good hand and you want me to think you have better." "I do not hum." "You absolutely hum." "It is a little tune, maybe 3 notes. Lyra opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. "Fine, I hum, but only because you whistle through your teeth when you are trying to remember the rules." "I do not whistle." "You absolutely whistle." They stared at each other for a moment, then both started laughing. Owen could not remember the last time he had laughed like this, easy and genuine, with someone who understood his humor. It felt good. It felt right. The winter deepened, and the world outside became a frozen wasteland. Another storm came, less violent than the first but longer, trapping them in the cabin for nearly a week. Owen found he did not mind. Lyra's presence had transformed the small space, made it feel less like a shelter and more like a home. They fell into easy companionship, talking late into the night about everything and nothing. Lyra told him stories of her childhood in the northern mountains, of festivals and traditions that sounded both alien and achingly familiar. Owen shared memories of his own youth, of his brother teaching him to fish, of his mother's terrible singing and his father's patient carpentry. Sometimes, in the firelight, Owen would look up and find Lyra watching him with an expression he could not quite read. It reminded him of those months when she had stood at the edge of his clearing, silent and observant, and he wondered what she saw when she looked at him. What had kept her coming back, week after week, before she even knew his name? One evening, as they sat by the fire drinking tea made from dried herbs, Owen finally gathered the courage to ask, "Why did you watch me? Before we spoke, I mean. All those months." Lyra was quiet for a long time, her gaze fixed on the flames. Owen thought she might not answer, might retreat into the silence she had worn like armor for so long. Then she spoke, her voice soft. "I was on a scouting patrol. Late spring, nearly a year ago now. I was mapping the human settlements in this region, trying to determine if they posed a threat to my people." "Did we?" "No, you were just farmers and trappers, people trying to survive. But I was supposed to report back on every homestead, every family." She paused, her fingers tightening around her cup. "I found your place on a warm day in May. You were building that fence by your garden, the one that still leans a little to the left." Owen smiled despite himself. "I know, I keep meaning to fix it. You were singing while you worked. Some human song I did not know, off-key and cheerful. And when you finished a section, you stepped back and looked so proud of yourself, even though anyone could see it was crooked." Lyra's voice had gone even softer. "I watched you for maybe an hour." You took a break and ate lunch sitting on the ground, and you fed half your bread to the birds, just tore it into pieces and scattered it, watching them come. I remember that day, Owen said quietly. I was supposed to move on. I had other homesteads to scout. But something about you made me stay. You seemed so content, so at peace with yourself and the world. I had never seen anyone, orc or human, who looked the way you did. Like you had found something the rest of us were still searching for. Lyra finally looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting firelight. So I came back. I told myself I was being thorough, making sure you were not a threat. But really, I just wanted to see if that peace was real, if it would last. Owen felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of the loneliness in her words. And did it last, I mean? Yes. Every time I visited, you were the same, working hard, talking to your horse, feeding the birds. You never seemed angry or cruel, never took your frustrations out on anything weaker than yourself. You were just kind. She said the last word like it was precious, something rare and valuable. I had not seen much kindness in my life. I wanted to understand it, wanted to understand you. I am not that special, Owen said, uncomfortable with the weight of her gaze. You are, though, you just do not see it. Lyra set down her cup. When those bandits attacked that family, I did not even think. I just knew I could not let them hurt those people. Could not let them hurt you when you were trying to be a hero with your rifle and your shaking hands. And afterward, when you thanked me and asked my name, I wanted so badly to answer. Wanted to tell you everything, but I did not know how. You could have just said hello, Owen said gently. Could I? What would you have thought if an orc woman appeared in your clearing and struck up a conversation? You would have been terrified. Maybe at first, but I like to think I would have gotten over it. Lyra smiled, sad and small. Maybe, but I could not risk it. So I stayed silent, and I watched, and I told myself it was enough. Owen reached across the space between them and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her fingers calloused from weapon work. She looked down at their joined hands with something like wonder in her eyes. You saved my life when you came here injured, he said. You gave me purpose again. I had been drifting, just going through the motions of living. But these past weeks, having you here, talking to you, learning about you, I feel alive again. Owen, I am glad you watched me, he continued. I am glad you came to my homestead. I am glad you are here now. And when you heal, when you are ready to leave, I hope you will choose to stay. Lyra's eyes glistened in the firelight, and for a moment, Owen thought she might pull away. Then her fingers tightened around his, and she nodded once. It was answer enough. The winter stretched on, and Lyra's wound healed until it was nothing more than a pale scar across her green skin. She grew stronger, her movements regaining their fluid grace, and soon she was doing as much work around the homestead as Owen. They fell into partnership as naturally as breathing, each anticipating the other's needs, moving in sync as if they had worked together for years rather than weeks. But something had changed between them since the night of her confession. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken feelings. Owen found himself acutely aware of Lyra's presence, of the way she moved, the sound of her laugh, the serious expression she wore when she was thinking hard about something. He caught her watching him sometimes with those amber eyes, and the intensity of her gaze made his heart race. He was falling in love with her. The realization came one morning as he watched her feed the chickens, her movements careful and precise as she scattered grain. She had rolled up her sleeves despite the cold, and the winter sunlight caught on her green skin, turning it luminous. She was beautiful, Owen thought. Not in the way human women were beautiful, perhaps, but in a way that was entirely her own. Strong and fierce and gentle all at once, with a vulnerability she only showed to him. The question was whether she felt the same way. And if she did, what they could possibly do about it. February brought a thaw, and with it the first hints that spring might eventually come. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown grass and muddy ground. Lyra's restlessness grew as she healed, and Owen knew the day was coming when she would leave. The thought filled him with a hollow dread he tried hard to hide one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Lyra spoke. "I should go soon. Return to my people, let them know I am alive." Owen's hands tightened on his mug of tea. "I thought you might say that. I have been gone for months. They will worry." "Will you come back?" The question hung in the air between them. Lyra turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "Do you want me to?" "Yes," Owen said simply. "Very much." "Why?" "Because I care about you. Because these months with you have been the happiest I can remember. Because I do not want to go back to being alone." He took a breath. "Because I think I might be falling in love with you." Lyra went very still. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "You cannot love me, I am an orc. I know what you are, I do not care. Your people will care. My people will care. There are laws against, I do not care about laws written by people who want to keep us divided." Owen set down his mug and turned to face her fully. "I care about you, about who you are, not what you are, and I think maybe you care about me too." Lyra closed her eyes. "You do not understand what you are saying, the things that would happen if people found out, the danger you would be in." "Then we will be careful, but I am not going to pretend I do not feel this way just because it is complicated." Owen reached for her hand again, and after a moment she let him take it. "Stay, please, or go and come back, but do not leave because you think it is what I want. I want you here. Owen." His name on her lips was half plea, half prayer. "I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of this. Of wanting something I cannot have. Of hoping for something that will only bring pain." She opened her eyes, and Owen saw tears threatening to fall. "I have loved you since the first winter. Since those early visits when I watched you and did not even know your name. I have loved you through every silent vigil, every moment I told myself I should leave and never come back, and I am terrified of what that love means." Owen felt his heart expand and break and heal all at once. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his forehead to hers. This close, he could see the flecks of gold in her amber eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath. "I am terrified too, but I would rather be terrified with you than safe and alone." Lyra made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Then she closed the distance between them and kissed him. Her lips were soft despite her tusks, and she tasted like the herbal tea they had been drinking. Owen cupped her face in his hands, mindful of her pointed ears, and kissed her back with all the longing he had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lyra rested her forehead against his shoulder. "What are we going to do?" "I do not know," Owen admitted. "But we will figure it out, together." They sat like that as the sun finished setting and the stars came out, holding each other and trying not to think too hard about the future. For now, this moment was enough, but reality has a way of intruding on even the most perfect moments. 3 days later, as Owen was repairing a section of his barn roof, he heard horses approaching. He climbed down to find 4 men riding into his clearing, and his heart sank when he recognized the lead rider. It was the scarred bandit from the road, the one who had tried to attack the family. The man smiled when he saw Owen, a cold expression that did not reach his eyes. "Well, well, the hero farmer, we have been looking for you." Owen's mind raced. Lyra was inside the cabin, hopefully out of sight. He needed to keep these men away from her. "I do not want any trouble." "No." "That is a shame, because we certainly want trouble." The scarred man dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. "See, you cost us our prey that day, and then someone killed 3 of my boys, left them in the snow all cut up by orc axes." I do not know anything about that. No. Funny thing is, we tracked the orc that did it, followed the blood trail right to this homestead. The bandit's smile widened. So I am thinking maybe you do know something about it. I am thinking maybe you are sheltering an orc, and that is a hanging offense in these parts. Owen's hand moved toward his belt where his knife hung, but the other 3 bandits had drawn their guns. He forced himself to stay calm. There is no orc here. You are mistaken. Am I? Then you would not mind if we searched your property. I absolutely would mind. This is my land and you are trespassing. Leave now, or I will report you to the territorial marshal. The bandit laughed. The marshal is 3 days' ride away, and by the time he gets here, you will be cold in the ground. Now step aside, or the cabin door opened and Lyra stepped out. She had her axes in her hands and murder in her eyes. Leave him alone. The bandits swung their guns toward her, but Lyra was already moving. She threw one of her axes with deadly accuracy, and it buried itself in the nearest bandit's chest. He fell from his horse with a scream, and chaos erupted. The other men fired, but Lyra was impossibly fast, diving behind the woodpile as bullets tore through the space where she had been standing. Owen lunged for the barn, where his rifle waited. The scarred bandit turned his gun toward Owen, but before he could fire, Lyra vaulted over the woodpile and slammed into him. They went down in a tangle of limbs, and the gun went off into the air. Owen reached his rifle and spun around to see one of the remaining bandits taking aim at Lyra's unprotected back. He did not think. He just aimed and fired, the way he had been trained to do during the war. The bandit jerked and fell from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Owen worked the bolt and swung the rifle toward the last bandit, who took one look at the scene and spurred his horse into a gallop, fleeing back down the road. The scarred bandit had managed to get his knife out and was slashing at Lyra. She blocked with her forearm, and Owen heard her grunt of pain. Then she headbutted the man, her forehead smashing into his nose with a sickening crunch. The bandit went limp, and Lyra stood up, breathing hard. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the bloody clearing. Then Owen dropped his rifle and ran to her. "Are you hurt?" "Just a scratch." Lyra looked down at her arm where the knife had opened a shallow cut. I am fine. You saved my life again. I told you, life debt." But her voice was shaking, and when Owen pulled her into his arms, she clung to him. They had 3 bodies to bury and a prisoner to deal with. The scarred bandit came to as Owen was tying his hands, and he spat blood when he saw Lyra. "You are both dead. When word gets out that you are sheltering an orc, every human in the territory will hunt you down. Then it is a good thing we are not planning to tell anyone," Owen said calmly. He looked at Lyra. "We have to leave. You know that, right? If that 4th bandit talks or if anyone else finds out, I know." Lyra's expression was grim. "We can go to my people, in the mountains. They will give us shelter, and they will accept a human. If I vouch for you, yes, it will not be easy, but we will be together." Owen looked around at his homestead, at the cabin he had built with his own hands, the land he had cleared and planted. He was about to lose everything he had worked for. The thought should have devastated him, but when he looked at Lyra, all he felt was certainty. "Then we go to the mountains." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Owen packed what supplies he could carry, said goodbye to Daisy and his other animals, knowing Silas would find them eventually and give them a good home. He took his father's rifle and his mother's wedding ring and left the rest. Lyra helped him bury the bandits in a single grave, and they tied the scarred man to a tree with water and supplies within reach. Someone would find him eventually. As the sun set, they stood together in front of the cabin one last time. Owen felt a pang of loss, but when Lyra took his hand, he squeezed back. They shouldered their packs and set off into the gathering darkness, heading north toward the mountains and whatever future waited for them there. The journey took 8 days. They traveled mostly at night to avoid being seen, sleeping in caves and sheltered valleys during the day. The weather was cold and unpredictable, with sudden squalls that left them soaked and shivering. But they kept moving, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant capture and likely death. Lyra led the way with confidence, navigating by stars and landmarks Owen could not see. She was in her element in the wilderness, moving through the forest with practiced ease, and Owen did his best to keep up. His body ached from the constant travel, and his feet developed blisters that burst and reformed, but he did not complain. Lyra checked on him often, her concern evident even when she tried to hide it. On the 5th night, as they sheltered in a narrow ravine while rain hammered down, Owen built a small fire despite the risk. They needed warmth, and the ravine walls would hide the light. Lyra sat close beside him, and Owen draped his coat over both their shoulders. "Tell me about your people," he said. "What should I expect when we arrive?" Lyra considered. "They are traditional, set in their ways. They will be suspicious of you at first, maybe hostile, but they are also honorable. If I claim you as my mate, they will respect that." "Your mate?" Owen felt his heart skip. "It is what you would call a husband, I think, a life partner." Lyra looked at him, her expression serious. "Is that what you want, to be bound to me according to my people's customs?" "Yes," Owen said without hesitation. "If you will have me, I told you. I have loved you since the first winter." Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder. "I am yours if you want me. Then I am the luckiest man alive." They held each other as the rain continued, and Owen felt a peace settle over him despite everything they had lost. As long as they were together, they could face whatever came next. The mountains rose before them on the 8th day, a wall of stone and snow that seemed to touch the sky. Lyra led Owen up narrow paths that would have been invisible to him without her guidance. The air grew thinner, and Owen found himself gasping for breath, but Lyra helped him along with patient encouragement. They encountered the first orc patrol in the late afternoon. 3 warriors appeared from behind boulders, weapons drawn, their expressions hostile until they recognized Lyra. Then the hostility turned to shock, and one of them, a tall orc woman with graying hair and a scar across her face, stepped forward. "Lyra Frosthammer, we thought you were dead." "Nearly was," Lyra replied in the orcish language. Owen could not follow the words, but he understood the tone. Relief, exhaustion, determination. Lyra gestured to him and said something that made all 3 warriors turn to stare. The scarred woman switched to human speech, presumably for Owen's benefit. "You bring a human to our territory." "I bring my mate to our territory," Lyra corrected, her chin lifting. "He is under my protection. Anyone who harms him answers to me." The warriors exchanged glances. Finally, the scarred woman nodded. "Then he is welcome by the old laws. Come, the clan will want to see you." They were escorted up the mountain to a valley hidden among the peaks. Owen stared in amazement as orc dwellings came into view. Stone buildings built into the mountainside, connected by bridges and pathways. Smoke rose from chimneys, and he could hear the sounds of a community at work. Hammers on metal, children laughing, voices raised in conversation. Lyra's return caused a stir. Orcs emerged from buildings and stopped their work to watch as the patrol led them through the settlement. Owen felt the weight of dozens of eyes on him, saw suspicion and curiosity and outright hostility. He kept his head up and his hand in Lyra's, drawing strength from her presence. They were brought to a large building at the center of the settlement, and inside, Owen found himself face to face with the clan leader. She was an older orc woman with pure white hair and eyes like chips of ice, her tusks filed to sharp points. She looked at Owen with such intensity that he had to resist the urge to step back. "So," she said in perfect human speech, "Lyra Frosthammer returns from the dead, and she brings a human lover. Explain." Lyra told the story from beginning to end. Her scouting missions, her months watching Owen, the bandit attack, her injury and Owen's care, their growing love, and finally the attack that had forced them to flee. She spoke with clear, ringing conviction, and Owen watched the clan leader's expression shift from skepticism to something that might have been respect. When Lyra finished, the clan leader was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You claim this human as your mate." "I do." "And you, human, do you understand what this means? You will be bound to her by our laws, not yours. You will live among us, follow our customs, raise your children as orc. You will give up your human life entirely. Do you accept this?" Owen looked at Lyra, at the woman who had watched over him, saved him, loved him. "I do." The clan leader studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well. By the old laws, I recognize this union. Lyra Frosthammer, you and your mate may build a home among us. But know this, human. If you betray our trust, if you bring harm to our people, no bond will protect you. You understand?" "I understand. And I swear I will never harm your people. They are Lyra's people, which makes them my people too." Something that might have been approval flickered in the clan leader's icy eyes. "We will see. You are dismissed." They were given a small dwelling carved into the mountainside, 2 rooms with a hearth and simple furnishings. It was rough compared to Owen's cabin, but it was shelter and it was theirs. That night, as they lay together on a bed of furs, Owen felt Lyra relax for the first time since they had fled his homestead. "We made it," she whispered. "We did." Owen kissed her forehead. "Together." "Are you sure about this? About giving up your life to be here with me?" "My life is with you. Everything else is just details." Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then she said, after months of silence, the orc woman finally said, "I have loved you since the first winter." That is what the storytellers will say about us, you know, when they tell our tale around the fires. Owen smiled in the darkness. "Not a bad story. No, not bad at all." The weeks that followed were difficult. Owen had to learn a new language, new customs, new ways of living. Some of the clan members were welcoming, curious about the human who had won Lyra's heart. Others were coldly polite at best, openly hostile at worst. But Owen persevered, working hard to prove himself, and slowly he earned respect. He learned to work the forges, discovered he had a talent for metalwork. He helped with construction and repairs, his carpentry skills translating well to orc building methods. He taught some of the younger orcs to read and write in human script, which proved valuable for trade negotiations with frontier settlements. And every evening, he returned to the dwelling he shared with Lyra, and they talked and laughed and loved each other, and Owen knew he had made the right choice. Spring came to the mountains, and with it a thaw that was both literal and figurative. The worst of the clan's suspicion faded as Owen continued to prove his loyalty. He made friends, particularly with an old orc man named Gracker who had been a warrior before age slowed him. Gracker taught Owen the history of the orc clans, their traditions and beliefs, and Owen soaked it up eagerly. One evening in late April, as Owen and Lyra sat outside their dwelling watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red, Lyra took his hand. "I have news." Something in her tone made Owen's heart race. "What kind of news?" "The good kind. At least, I hope you think it is good." She placed his hand on her stomach. "I am with child." Owen stared at her, the words taking a moment to process. Then joy flooded through him so intensely it almost hurt. "Truly, truly." "The healer confirmed it this morning. By winter we will have a son or daughter." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. "That is wonderful. That is the best news I could imagine. You are not afraid. A half-orc child will face challenges from both our peoples. Then we will help them face those challenges. Together. Owen pulled back to look at her. We will teach them to be strong and kind the way you are. We will give them a home full of love. And if anyone has a problem with what they are, they will have to answer to us. Lyra's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Have I told you lately that I love you? Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry. She laughed and kissed him, and Owen thought about how far they had come. From silent watchfulness to love, from separate worlds to a shared home, from loneliness to family. It had not been an easy path, and he knew challenges still lay ahead. But they would face them together, and that made all the difference. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Lyra remained active through most of it, only slowing down in the final months when her belly grew large. The clan rallied around them with surprising warmth, the prospect of a new child softening even the hardest hearts. Orc women brought gifts and advice, and Owen found himself swept up in preparations, building a cradle, gathering supplies, making sure their dwelling was ready for an infant. Winter returned, and with it memories of the previous year when Lyra had arrived at his cabin bleeding and near death. So much had changed since then. Owen had lost his homestead but gained a home, lost his solitude but gained a family. He had learned that love could bridge any divide, that home was not a place, but the people you chose to share your life with. Lyra went into labor on a cold night in December, exactly 1 year after Owen had found her collapsed in his clearing. The birth was long and difficult, and Owen paced outside their dwelling while the orc midwife worked, driven half-mad with worry. But when he was finally allowed inside, he found Lyra exhausted but smiling, and in her arms was a tiny infant with green-tinged skin and the smallest tusks Owen had ever seen. "A son," Lyra said softly. "We have a son." Owen knelt beside the bed and looked down at his child. The baby had Lyra's eyes, amber and bright, and a dusting of black hair. His tiny fingers wrapped around Owen's thumb, and Owen felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it took his breath away. "He is perfect," Owen whispered. "What should we name him?" Lyra asked. Owen thought of the journey that had brought them here, of the hardships they had overcome and the love that had sustained them. "Hadric Frosthammer, if you approve." Lyra smiled. "Hadric Northfield Frosthammer. He should carry both our names, both our peoples." Agreed. They sat together, the three of them, and watched the winter dawn break over the mountains. Outside, snow fell in soft flakes, covering the valley in white. Inside, warmth and love filled the small dwelling, and Owen knew he had found what he had been searching for all along. The months passed, and Hadric grew from a tiny infant into a lively baby. He had his mother's curiosity and his father's easy laughter, and he was doted on by the entire clan. Owen watched in amazement as his son learned to crawl, then walk, then babble his first words in a mix of Orcish and human speech. Life in the mountain valley settled into a comfortable rhythm. Owen continued his work at the forges and taught classes in human language and writing. Lyra served as a scout again, though she stayed closer to home now, unwilling to be away from Hadric for more than a day or two. They built a life together, piece by piece, and Owen found a contentment he had never imagined possible. 1 year became 2, then 3. Hadric grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved listening to stories and helping his father in the forge. He had friends among both the full-blood orc children and the handful of other mixed families that had formed in the years since Owen and Lyra's arrival. The clan leaders' acceptance of their union had opened a door, and others had followed through it. On a warm spring evening when Hadric was 3 years old, Owen and Lyra sat on a bench outside their dwelling, watching their son play with a wooden horse Owen had carved for him. Lyra leaned against Owen's shoulder and he wrapped an arm around her. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked quietly. "Leaving your homestead, your human life?" Owen considered the question seriously, the way he always did when Lyra asked something important. "Sometimes I miss the quiet. And I think about my cabin, wonder if Silas took care of things the way I hoped. But regret? No, never. This life with you, with Hadrick, with the clan, this is what I was meant for. I just did not know it until you showed me." After months of silence, the orc woman finally said, "I have loved you since the first winter," Lyra quoted softly. "Do you remember when I told you that?" "I do. On my porch, watching the sunset. You were so afraid of what that love meant. I am not afraid anymore." Lyra turned to look at him, and in her amber eyes Owen saw peace and certainty. "You taught me that love is worth the risk, worth the fear, worth everything." "You taught me the same thing," Owen said. He kissed her gently, mindful of their son playing nearby. "You watched over me before I even knew you existed. You saved my life in more ways than one, and you gave me a future I never dared to dream of." Hadrick ran over to them, his wooden horse clutched in one hand. "Daddy, Mama, look. Gracker says tomorrow he will teach me how to use a practice sword." "I am going to be a great warrior just like Mama," Lyra laughed and ruffled his hair. "A warrior, is it? And here I thought you wanted to be a smith like your father." "I will be both. I will make the best swords and then use them better than anyone," Owen grinned. "That is an ambitious goal. But I believe you can do it, if you work hard and listen to your teachers." Hadrick nodded seriously, then ran off again to show his horse to another child. Owen and Lyra watched him go, and Owen felt a profound gratitude for the strange path that had led them here. From watching silence to spoken love, from enemies to mates, from two lonely souls to a family. It had not been easy, and the world outside still viewed their union with suspicion and hostility. But here in this valley, among people who had learned to accept them, they had found peace. "Thank you," Owen said suddenly. Lyra looked at him quizzically. "For what?" "For watching me. For caring enough to come back week after week. For being brave enough to love me despite everything that stood against us." Owen took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "For choosing me." "You chose me too," Lyra pointed out. "You could have turned me away when I was injured, could have refused to shelter me, to help me. Instead, you saved my life and asked for nothing in return. I asked for your name, and I gave it to you, along with my heart." Lyra squeezed his hand. "We chose each other, Owen. Every day we keep choosing each other. That is what makes this work." She was right, Owen knew. Love was not just a feeling or a moment of passion. It was a choice made over and over, through hardship and joy, through conflict and harmony. He and Lyra had chosen each other despite their different peoples, despite the prejudices and dangers, despite every reason they should have stayed apart. And they would keep choosing each other for the rest of their lives. As the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Owen held his wife close and watched their son play, and he knew he was exactly where he belonged. The orc woman who had watched him in silence had become his partner, his love, his home. And whatever the future held, they would face it together, bound by a love that had overcome every obstacle. After months of silence, the orc woman had finally said, "I have loved you since the first winter." And Owen, the human man who had learned to see past prejudice and fear, had answered with his whole heart, "Then let us build a life worth loving." They had built that life, stone by stone, choice by choice, and it was good. Years continued to pass in the mountain valley, bringing changes both large and small. Hadrick grew tall and strong, excelling at both smithwork and combat training just as he had promised. He inherited his mother's grace and his father's steady patience, and he moved between the orc and human parts of his heritage with an ease that gave Owen hope for the future. When Hadric was 6, Lyra gave birth to a daughter. They named her Nara, and she had her father's lighter green skin and her mother's fierce determination. Where Hadric was measured and thoughtful, Nara was impulsive and bold, forever getting into mischief that made Lyra laugh and Owen shake his head in amused exasperation. The clan continued to grow and change as well. More mixed couples formed, and the old prejudices slowly eroded. Trade with the frontier settlements increased, and Owen found himself serving as an ambassador of sorts, his ability to navigate both cultures making him valuable to the clan leaders. He never forgot where he came from, but he had truly become part of the mountain community, his presence no longer questioned or remarked upon. One autumn day, when Hadric was 10 and Nara was 4, a messenger arrived from the human settlements. He brought news that made Owen's heart clench. Silas, his old neighbor, had died. The trapper had left his property and all his possessions to Owen if he wanted to claim them. Owen stood in the clan leader's hall, holding the letter that detailed Silas's bequest, and felt the pull of his old life. Silas had been kind to him, had checked on him during that first hard winter, and the thought that the old man had remembered him brought tears to Owen's eyes. Lyra found him later, sitting alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. She settled beside him without speaking, the way she always did when he needed to think. Finally, Owen said, "Silas left me his land, his cabin, his traps, everything. Will you go claim it? I do not know. That life feels like it belonged to someone else, but Silas was good to me. I feel like I owe him something." Lyra was quiet for a moment, then she said, "We could go together, all of us, not to stay but to honor his memory, to show Hadric and Nara where you came from." Owen looked at her in surprise. "You would do that, go back to human lands?" "For you, yes. And I think it would be good for the children to understand both their heritages, to see the cabin where their father lived, the land where we met." Lyra took his hand. "Besides, I am curious. I want to see this place that shaped you." So they made the journey, the whole family, traveling down from the mountains in early winter. It took longer with the children, but Hadric and Nara treated it as an adventure, asking endless questions about the world beyond their valley. Owen and Lyra answered patiently, preparing them for the human settlements they would encounter. The frontier had changed in the years since Owen had fled. More homesteads dotted the landscape, and the buffer zone between human and orc territories had filled in with families brave or desperate enough to risk the borderlands. People stared when they saw the obviously mixed family, but no one challenged them. The war was more than a decade past now, and newer generations were slowly learning to coexist. Silas's cabin was exactly as Owen remembered, though emptier without the old trapper's presence. They spent a week there, sorting through possessions and deciding what to keep and what to donate to neighbors. Owen found Silas's journals and discovered that the old man had written about him often with affection and pride. "The boy has grit," one entry read. "Made a home in the wilderness and did not let it break him. I hope he found what he was looking for." Owen had found what he was looking for, and so much more. He showed Hadric and Nara around the property, pointing out the places he had worked and built. They visited his old homestead too, and Owen was surprised to find the cabin still standing, though clearly abandoned. The fence he had built leaned even more to the left now, and weeds had overtaken his garden. "This is where Mama first saw you?" Hadric asked, looking around with interest. "Yes. I was working on that fence, singing badly." Nara giggled. "You still sing badly, Papa." "That is true," Lyra agreed, her eyes twinkling. Owen laughed and pulled them all close. Well, it is a good thing you love me anyway. They spent one night in the old cabin, the four of them crowded into the small space. Owen lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, listening to his family breathe and thinking about the man he had been when he lived here. That Owen had been lonely and adrift, searching for purpose. The man he was now had found that purpose in love and family, in bridging two worlds that had been at war. Before they left, Owen carved a message into the cabin wall, next to where his father's rifle had once hung. Here lived a man who learned that home is not a place, but the people you choose to love. They returned to the mountains as winter deepened, and life resumed its comfortable rhythm. The children grew, and the clan prospered, and Owen and Lyra grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their challenges, of course. Hadrick struggled with acceptance when he visited human settlements on trade missions, and Nara had her mother's temper, which led to conflicts with peers. But the family faced these challenges together, supporting each other through difficult times. When Hadrick was 18, he announced his intention to serve as a scout like his mother had, working to maintain peace between human and orc territories. Owen felt pride and fear in equal measure, but he supported his son's choice. Lyra trained Hadrick personally, teaching him everything she knew about moving unseen and reading the land. And when Hadrick set out on his first mission, both his parents stood watching until he disappeared into the trees. "He will be fine," Lyra said, though Owen heard the worry in her voice. "I know. He is your son. He knows how to survive. He is your son too. He knows how to care." They turned and walked back to their dwelling hand in hand, their hair now touched with gray but their love still strong. Nara was waiting for them, already planning her own future. She wanted to be a master smith, to create weapons and tools that would serve both humans and orcs. Owen had begun teaching her advanced techniques, and she showed a natural talent that exceeded even his own. More years passed. Hadrick returned from his missions with stories of slowly improving relations between the peoples. He eventually married an orc woman from a neighboring clan, and they gave Owen and Lyra their first grandchildren. Nara opened a forge that became famous across the region for the quality of its work, and she employed both human and orc apprentices, creating a place where the two cultures worked side by side. Owen and Lyra grew old together, their bodies slowing but their spirits still strong. They spent their days working when they could, playing with grandchildren, and sitting together in the evenings to watch the sun set over the mountains. They had built a legacy, not just in their children but in the community they had helped create, where humans and orcs lived and worked together in peace. One winter evening, when they were both in their 60s, they sat together wrapped in furs, watching snow fall outside their dwelling. Their great-grandchildren were playing nearby, a mix of human and orc features that represented the future Owen and Lyra had helped forge. "You remember the day we met?" Lyra asked, her voice softer with age but still familiar. "Which time?" "When you first watched me, or when I finally learned your name, when I finally spoke, when I was lying in your bed, wounded and afraid, and you promised to protect me. I remember. You asked why I would help an orc, and I said I did not care about old hatreds." "You changed my life that day," Lyra said. "You showed me that the world could be different, that I could be different." Owen squeezed her hand gently. "You changed my life too. You gave me purpose and love and a family I never dreamed I could have. You taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it." Lyra leaned her head on his shoulder, the gesture as natural as breathing after decades together. After months of silence, the orc woman finally said, "I have loved you since the first winter. Remember when I told you that? How could I forget? It was the moment I knew we could build something real together. We built more than something real. We built something lasting. Lyra gestured to their grandchildren playing in the snow. Look at them. They do not know the hatred we knew. They are growing up in a world we helped create, where love matters more than prejudice. Owen felt emotion tighten his throat. She was right. They had not just fallen in love, they had helped change the world one choice at a time. Their children and grandchildren lived in a better world because Owen and Lyra had been brave enough to love across boundaries that were supposed to be impassable. I would do it all again, Owen said quietly. Every hardship, every danger, every moment of fear. All of it just to end up here with you. As would I. Lyra lifted her head to kiss him, her tusks no longer something foreign but familiar and dear. Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me. Thank you for watching over me, for loving me. They sat together as the snow continued to fall, and the firelight danced on the walls. Two people who had bridged worlds through love. Their story had become legend among both humans and orcs. The tale of the silent watcher and the lonely farmer, of a love that overcame prejudice, of a family that showed a different future was possible. After months of silence, the orc woman had finally said, "I have loved you since the first winter." And the human man had answered, "Then let us make all our winters together." They had kept that promise, through hardship and joy, through raising children and building a community, through growing old together in the mountains. As night fell and their great-grandchildren were called home by their parents, Owen and Lyra remained on their bench, holding each other close. They had found their happily ever after, not in a single moment of triumph, but in decades of choosing each other, choosing love, choosing to believe in a better world. The snow fell softly around them, covering the valley in white, and two hearts that had once been lonely beat in perfect synchronization, together until the very end. Their love story was complete, and it was good.